Imagine two neighbors, same age, both 70, both retired, both in good health. One of them is out the door by 8 a.m. every single day. Gym, errands, lunch with someone, always moving, always somewhere to be. The other one, he's in his backyard, slowly watering his tomatoes. Nowhere to be, no rush. And when you watch him closely, there's something almost unsettling about how content he looks. His daughter calls it concerning. His doctor suggests joining a seniors group. His old work buddy says, "Man, don't you go crazy just sitting around." But the look on his face says something completely different. He's not escaping. He's not declining. He's not waiting for something better to come along. He's arrived somewhere most people never find. So, what's actually happening in the mind of a man like that? Because the world tends to pathologize him, treat his preference like a problem, and almost nobody stops to ask whether he might actually be onto something that the rest of us haven't figured out yet. That's what we're pulling apart today. Most men who are now in their late 60s or 70s spent the better part of their adult lives inhabiting a version of themselves built for other people's comfort, not in a dramatic way, not even consciously most of the time. It was the version of himself that shook hands firmly in conference rooms, that didn't show frustration when a client was being unreasonable, that laughed at the right moments at the company dinner, even when the joke wasn't funny, that pushed tiredness aside and kept moving because stopping wasn't an option. Psychologists call this process self-monitoring, the constant low-grade work of adjusting your behavior to meet social expectations. And what's well documented in the research is that high self-monitoring is genuinely exhausting, not dramatically, not in a way you'd notice on any given Tuesday, but cumulatively, over years and decades, it creates a kind of chronic internal friction. Now, retirement arrives, and for the first time in 40 years, nobody needs anything from this man by 9 a.m. Nobody is measuring his output. Nobody needs the performance. His home, his actual physical home, becomes the first place in memory where he can simply be the unedited version of himself, where he doesn't have to calibrate his voice or his posture or his enthusiasm level. And notice this, because it matters. The chair he sits in isn't just furniture. It's the first place that's ever been entirely on his terms. So when someone looks at him sitting quietly and sees inactivity, what they're actually watching is a man exhaling for the first time in 4 decades. Telling someone like that to get out more, without understanding, this is like telling a person to sprint before they've finished gasping. What actually helps? Recognizing that the stillness isn't a problem to solve. It's a pressure valve releasing. The men who come through this phase and genuinely flourish are the ones given the room to decompress before anyone starts asking them to perform again. Now here's something that catches most people off guard. A significant number of senior men who love being home didn't become this way in old age. They were always this way. They just spent 50 years masking it because the cultural script for men didn't allow for any other option. Picture the structure of a man's life from childhood forward. Classrooms packed with other kids, team sports, group projects, then offices, open-plan workspaces, client calls, networking events, birthday dinners for people he barely knew, neighborhood cookouts where the real reason to attend was just to be seen attending. For a man with a naturally introverted temperament, every single one of those situations required spending something. Social energy that didn't refill during the event itself, only afterward, alone, in quiet. And for decades, there was no culturally acceptable way to honor that. Men who preferred solitude were seen as antisocial, standoffish, maybe even suspicious. So they showed up, they engaged, they performed sociability, and then retirement removed the obligation. What happens next isn't withdrawal, it's revelation. The man discovers, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a single quiet morning, that he can structure his entire day around activities that actually restore him instead of cost him. Research on psychological well-being in older adults consistently shows that autonomy, the sense of genuine control over your daily life, is one of the strongest predictors of life satisfaction in later years. Not how often you go out, not your social calendar, actual control over your own time and environment. The man who chooses to stay home isn't rejecting the world. He's choosing himself, possibly for the very first time. And there's a specific quality you notice in men like this when you observe them closely. They're not wasting time. They're absorbed, reading something they actually care about, rebuilding an engine in the garage, growing something, making something, watching something with genuine curiosity. Psychologist Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi spent decades studying what he called flow, the state of being completely absorbed in a meaningful activity, where time disappears and engagement is total. His research found that flow happens most reliably in focused, solitary activities, not in social settings. The man in his garage at 10 a.m. on a Wednesday isn't bored. He's in one of the richest psychological states a human being can occupy. What's worth doing here? If you're that man, if this resonates, the move is to protect that absorption. Fill your hours with things that pull you forward, not things that merely consume time. There's a meaningful difference between a man who thrives in solitude and a man who disappears into passivity. The first is building something, even if it's invisible. The second is waiting. For most of his working years, the senior man's relationship with his house was essentially logistical. He left early. He returned late. He slept there. On weekends, he maintained it, fixed what broke, mowed what grew. But the house as a place of genuine daily life, that belonged to whoever was actually present in it during the day. Now, suddenly, he's present, all day, every day. And something shifts. He starts noticing details he never registered before. The way light moves across the kitchen floor in the morning. The sound the old refrigerator makes, rhythmic and oddly comforting. The specific feeling of a particular corner of the yard in late afternoon when the temperature drops slightly and everything gets golden. Researchers who study aging and environment use a phrase called place attachment, the emotional bond that forms between a person and a specific physical location. And what the research consistently shows is that for older adults, the home becomes an anchor of identity. It holds the physical evidence of a life lived, the height marks penciled on the doorframe where kids were measured every birthday, the garden that took 7 years to get right, the shelf in the workshop where every tool has a specific story, the chair that fits him in a way no other chair in the world does. This isn't sentimentality. This is a deeply human psychological phenomenon. The home stops being a backdrop and starts being an extension of who he is. And when people around him push him to leave, to get out, to go somewhere else, what they don't realize is they're asking him to step away from the place where he most fully exists. What actually works if you're trying to help him stay connected to the world? Stop framing his home as the obstacle. Make his home the hub. Bring people to him. Give his space a reason to be a gathering point rather than treating it like a problem to escape from. Run with this for a moment. Men who grew up in mid-20th century households absorbed a message so thoroughly that most of them can't even identify it as a message anymore. They just experience it as reality. The message was simple. Your value is your output, what you produce, what you earn, what you build, what you accomplish before the day ends. Rest is tolerated. Leisure is something you schedule after the real work is done. Sitting quietly in the middle of the afternoon for no particular reason is, at some subterranean level, shameful. That belief doesn't disappear at retirement. It follows him home, which is why what looks like effortless contentment from the outside often represents years of quiet internal negotiation on the inside. The man who is genuinely settled into his home life, who feels at peace rather than guilty about it, has accomplished something psychologically significant. He has given himself permission to exist without producing, to spend a Wednesday morning exactly the way he wants to spend it, not because he's earned a reward and not because anyone approved it, but simply because it's his life and his time. Developmental psychologist Erik Erikson described the central challenge of later life as integrity, the capacity to look at your own life with honesty and find it meaningful, rather than falling into regret about what it could have been. One of the roots to that integrity, it turns out, is self-acceptance, the ability to stop measuring your days against some external standard and start inhabiting them on their own terms. The man who has found genuine peace at home has usually done this work. He's stopped apologizing, internally to himself, for being who he actually is. Consider how rare that is, across all ages, across all walks of life. How many people ever genuinely get there? From the outside, he looks like a man who has stopped. From the inside, he has finally arrived. What supports this process? If you're a family member, resist the reflex to treat his contentment as a symptom. Contentment, in a person who is otherwise engaged and connected, is not a warning sign. It's the goal. The better question to ask isn't, why doesn't he want to go out? It's, does he have things that genuinely matter to him? If yes, back off and let him be. Here's what the standard narrative about isolated older men completely misses. Many senior men who love staying home have a social life. It's just structured differently from what gets recognized as one. It might be one phone call per week with a friend they've known since their 30s that runs 2 hours and covers everything. Health, memory, grandchildren, old arguments, things that never got said. It might be a neighbor who stops by every few days and the two of them sit in the garage and barely talk. But the presence means everything. It might be a specific online community built around something he deeply cares about, restoration, history, a particular craft, where he's known, respected, and genuinely seen. Anthropologist Robin Dunbar's research suggests that the innermost ring of meaningful human relationships, the people who genuinely matter to us, typically contains around 5 people. Just 5. What happens as men age, particularly men with quieter temperaments, is a natural and often conscious reduction in peripheral social activity. The large gatherings, the acquaintances, the social obligations tied to career or neighborhood status, those fall away. What remains is real, smaller in number, larger in meaning. This isn't isolation, this is precision. He has stopped spending energy on relationships that were never nourishing him and focused what he has on the ones that are. If you're genuinely concerned about a senior man in your life, the measure isn't how many events he attends. The measure is this. Does he have someone he could call at 2 a.m. if something went wrong? Does he have conversations that go somewhere real? Does anyone in his life actually know him? If yes, he's connected. The shape of that connection just doesn't match what you're used to seeing. This angle rarely shows up in these conversations, and it should. The nervous system changes as we age. That's not an opinion, it's physiology. The body's capacity to regulate stimulation, to filter background noise, to manage the low-grade sensory overload of busy restaurants and crowded spaces and unpredictable environments becomes genuinely less efficient over time. A man of 35 walks into a loud, crowded room and barely registers it. A man of 72 walks into the same room and his system is working significantly harder to process the same input. Not because something is wrong with him, because that's how human biology works across the lifespan. His home is a calibrated environment. He controls the temperature, the noise level, the lighting, the pace. His nervous system isn't fighting anything. It can finally operate at baseline. There's also the matter of sleep. Deep restorative sleep decreases naturally with age, which means that genuine rest becomes harder to achieve and simultaneously more critical to protect. Men who gravitate toward home in their senior years are often, without consciously framing it this way, protecting their capacity to recover, staying in the environment where their body can actually do that. So when a 71-year-old man says he'd rather stay home, he's not being difficult and he's not being lazy. He may be responding to completely accurate physiological information that his body has been quietly sending him. What works here? If you want to support a senior man in staying engaged with the world, meet his physiology where it actually is. A quiet dinner works better than a loud restaurant. A slow trip with no fixed schedule works better than a rushed group tour. Work with the biology rather than against it. And you'll get a version of him that's genuinely present, not one that's white-knuckling his way through an overstimulating experience just to seem normal. The final piece of this, and in some ways the most significant one, when you picture a senior man sitting quietly, perhaps looking out a window, perhaps in a chair with no book and no screen, apparently doing nothing, there's a human tendency to read emptiness into that stillness, to assume that nothing of consequence is happening. Neuroscience disagrees. That kind of unstructured quiet time is when the brain activates what researchers call the default mode network, a system associated with introspection, memory processing, meaning-making, and self-reflection. In practical terms, the brain is most actively engaged in its deepest work precisely when external demands are removed. The man sitting quietly isn't empty. He may be doing the most significant cognitive and emotional work of his entire life. Because late life, for many men, is the first time there's been enough silence to actually hear the questions that were always there underneath the noise. Not the problem-solving questions of a working life. Not the reactive questions of managing daily crises. The deeper ones. What did my choices actually cost me? What did I get right? What do I wish I'd understood sooner? Who were the people that genuinely shaped me? These aren't questions you answer in a busy schedule. They require exactly the conditions that the man sitting quietly has finally created for himself. Erikson, returning to his framework for a moment, described the psychological work of later adulthood as the construction of wisdom. And he was specific that this kind of wisdom cannot be rushed, cannot be outsourced, and cannot be achieved in noise. It requires reflection. It requires time. It requires exactly the kind of unstructured interior space that the man at home has stopped apologizing for protecting. So, pull all 7 of these threads together and look at what you actually have. A man who spent 40 years performing a version of himself for other people's benefit. Who finally has a space where that performance isn't required. Who may have been introverted his entire life and is only now living accordingly. Who has formed a genuine emotional bond with the environment that holds his history, who has done the hard internal work of granting himself permission to exist without constantly justifying it, whose social connections are smaller but more honest than they've ever been, whose body is giving him accurate information about what environments actually serve him, and who is, in the quiet of his own home, engaged in the kind of reflective inner work that represents some of the richest psychological territory a human being ever gets to explore. That's not a man in decline. That's a man who found his way home, in every sense of that word. The question was never why he wants to stay there. The real question is why it took the rest of us so long to understand it.